Before we dive into this crucial chapter of American history, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Today, we're looking at how Lord Shelburne, the most liberal British minister of his time, fought desperately to secure peace with America before his enemies in Parliament could destroy him. This is the story of a race against time, where the fate of a nation hung in the balance. On the death of Rockingham, King George offered Shelburne the employment of First Lord of the Treasury, and with it the fullest political confidence. Of no British minister had the principles been so liberal. He wished a thorough reform of the representation of the people of Great Britain in Parliament. Far from him was the thought that the prosperity of America could be injurious to England. He regarded neighboring nations as associates ministering to each other's welfare, and wished to form with France treaties of commerce as well as of peace. But Fox, who was entreated to remain in the ministry as Secretary of State, set up against him the narrow-minded Duke of Portland, under whose name the old aristocracy was to rule Parliament, king, and people. To gratify the violence of his headstrong pride, Fox threw away the opportunity of taking a chief part in restoring peace to the world, and struck a blow at liberal government in his own country, from which it did not recover in his lifetime. Fox insisted with his friends that Lord Shelburne was as fully devoted to the court as Lord North in his worst days. But Lord North, in his love of office, had, contrary to his own judgment, persisted in the American war to please the king. Shelburne accepted power only after he had brought the king to consent to peace with independent America. For the Home Department, the king preferred William Pitt, but it was assigned to the more experienced Thomas Townsend, and Pitt, at 23 years old, became Chancellor of the Exchequer. The seals of the Foreign Office were entrusted to Lord Grantham. In the House of Commons, Fox on the 9th of July made his defense, which in its vagueness and hesitation betrayed his consciousness that he had no ground to stand upon. In the debate, Conway said with truth that eagerness for exclusive power had been the guiding motive of Fox, between whom and Shelburne the difference of policy for America was very immaterial. But Shelburne had been able to convince his royal master that an acquiescence in its independence was, from the situation of the country and the necessity of the case, the wisest and most expedient measure that government could adopt. Burke called heaven and earth to witness the sincerity of his belief that the ministry of Lord Shelburne would be 50 times worse than that of Lord North, declaring that his accursed principles were to be found in Machiavelli, and that but for want of understanding he would be a Catiline or a Borgia. But William Jones wrote to Burke, "Shelburne has been faithful and just to me. The principles which he has professed to me are such as my reason approved." Franklin, long after Shelburne had retired from office, wrote, "In all my intercourse with him, I never saw any instance of him being insincere." On the 10th, Shelburne said in the House of Lords, "I stand firmly upon my consistency. I will never consent that a certain number of great lords should elect a prime minister who is the creature of an aristocracy and is vested with the plenitude of power, while the king is nothing more than a pageant or a puppet. Nothing is farther from my intention to renew the war in America. The sword is sheathed, never to be drawn there again." On the day Fox withdrew from the ministry, Shelburne wrote to Oswald, "I hope to receive early assurances from you that my confidence in the sincerity and good faith of Dr. Franklin has not been misplaced, and that he will concur with you in endeavoring to render effectual the great work in which our hearts and wishes are so equally interested. We have adopted his idea of the method to come to a general pacification by treating separately with each party. I beg him to believe that I can have no idea or design of acting toward him and his associates, but in the most open, liberal, and honorable manner." Franklin, from his long residence in England, knew thoroughly well the relations of its parties and the character of its public men, of whom the best were his personal friends. He was aware how precarious was the hold of Shelburne on power, and he made all haste to bring about an immediate pacification. On the 10th of July, in his own house near Paris and at his own invitation, he had an interview with Oswald and proposed to him the American conditions of peace. The articles which could not be departed from were the full and complete independence of the 13 states and the withdrawal of all British troops from them, the territorial integrity of each one of them, the settlement of the boundaries between the American colonies and Canada, a freedom of fishing on the banks of Newfoundland and elsewhere, as well for fishes as whales, with the right to dry fish on land. Having already explained that nothing could be done for the Loyalists by the United States, as their estates had been confiscated by laws of particular states which Congress had no power to repeal, he further demonstrated that Great Britain, by its conduct and example, had forfeited every right to intercede for them. To prove it, he read to Oswald the orders of the British in Carolina for confiscating and selling the lands and property of all patriots under the direction of the military, and he declared definitively that the American commissioners for peace could not make compensation of refugees a part of the treaty. He further directed attention to the persistent, systematic destruction of American property by the British armies as furnishing a claim to indemnity which might be set off against the demands of British merchants for debts contracted before the war. Franklin recommended, but not as an ultimatum, a perfect reciprocity in regard to ships and trade. Franklin intimated that American affairs must be ended by a separate commission, and that he did not, from any connection with other states, hesitate as to coming to a conclusion so as to end the American quarrel in a short time. The negotiation was opened and kept up with the knowledge of Vergennes, but Franklin withheld from him everything relating to its conditions. Jay, who had arrived in Paris on the 23rd of June from severe illness, took no part in this interview. The moment when England accepted the necessity of conceding independence to the 13 colonies which she had trained to the love of freedom and by her own inconsistencies had forced to take up arms, was in its importance one of the grandest moments in her history. So soon as Shelburne saw a prospect of a general pacification, Alain Fitzherbert, the British minister at Brussels, was transferred to Paris to be the channel of communication with Spain, France, and Holland. He brought letters from Franklin from Lord Grantham, who expressed his desire to merit Franklin's confidence, and from Townshend, who declared himself the zealous friend to peace upon the fairest and most liberal terms.
While the commission and instructions of Oswald were preparing, Shelburne accepted the ultimatum of Franklin in all its branches, and on the 27th he replied to Oswald, "Your several letters give me the greatest satisfaction, as they contain unequivocal proofs of Dr. Franklin's sincerity and confidence in those with whom he treats. It will be the study of His Majesty's ministers to return it by every possible cordiality. There never have been two opinions since you were sent to Paris upon the acknowledgment of American independency. But to put this matter out of all possibility of doubt, a commission will be immediately forwarded to you, containing full powers to make the independency of the colonies the basis and preliminary of the treaty now depending. I have never made a secret of the deep concern I feel in the separation of countries united by blood, by principles, habits, and every tie short of territorial proximity. But I have long since given it up, decidedly though reluctantly, and the same motives which made me perhaps the last to give up all hope of reunion make me most anxious, if it is given up, that it shall be done so as to avoid all future risk of enmity and lay the foundation of a new connection better adapted to the temper and interest of both countries. In this view, I go further with Dr. Franklin perhaps than he is aware of. I consider myself as pledged to the contents of this letter. You will find the ministry united, in full possession of the king's confidence, and thoroughly disposed to peace if it can be obtained upon reasonable terms. The commission to Oswald conformed to the enabling act of Parliament. The 13 colonies or plantations in North America were named one by one, and a commissioner appointed with power to conclude a peace or a truce with any commissioner named by the said colonies and plantations. Every word which could suggest a denial of their independence was avoided. The king pledged his name and word to ratify and confirm whatever might be concluded between the British and the American commissioners. No British statesman was so determined as Shelburne to bring about not merely peace but reconciliation with America on the noblest terms and by the noblest means. If the benefit of his goodwill is to be secured, the work must be finished before the next meeting of Parliament, when his ministry will surely be overthrown. Now is the accepted time. The Board of Trade no longer exists to interpose its cavils. The ready decision of Shelburne will give no opportunity for interested people to take alarm. An advance copy of the commission reached Oswald on the evening of the 6th of August. Early the next morning, he carried a copy of it to Franklin at Passy. Franklin, glad to the heart, repeated what he had said in June. "I hope we shall agree and not be long about it." He related that the day before, at Versailles, Vergennes had expressed impatience for its arrival, that his own negotiations with Fitzherbert might go hand in hand with those of the Americans and Oswald. Returning to Paris, Oswald showed the commission to Jay, whom he describes as a sensible man of plain yet civil manners and of a calm, obliging temper. Jay said that independence ought to be no part of a treaty. It ought to have been expressly granted by Act of Parliament. As that was not done, the king ought to do it now by proclamation and order all garrisons to be evacuated, and then close the American war with a treaty. Oswald's great expectations from his conversation with Franklin were damped by the unpleasant reception from Jay.
The advanced copy of Oswald's commission Franklin submitted to Vergennes. From the terms of the Treaty of Alliance between France and America, he was bound to form and had a right to express an opinion, and was most anxious that nothing might delay an early peace. Holding a conference with them on the 10th of August, he declared to them his opinion that they might proceed to treat with Oswald under the commission as soon as the original should arrive. Jay replied, "It would be descending from the ground of independence to treat under the description of colonies." Vergennes persisted in the opinion that the powers given to Oswald were sufficient, saying correctly, "This acceptance of your powers, in which you are styled commissioners from the United States of America, will be a tacit confession of your independence." Franklin, who had made a careful study of the subject, had no doubt that the commission would do. John Adams, the head of the commission, in July of the preceding year, after reflecting on the question, had sent to the American Congress his opinion. "I see nothing inconsistent with the character or dignity of the United States in their minister entering into treaty with a British minister without any explicit acknowledgment of our independence before the conclusion of the treaty." To Franklin, Jay, blinded by suspicion, made the remark, "The Count does not wish to see our independence acknowledged by Britain until they have made all their uses of us." If this had been true, Jay should have taken the surest and the shortest way of defeating the plan by proceeding at once to frame the treaty of peace with England. And he himself writes that such a treaty could have been finished in a few hours. By refusing to do so, he himself was carrying into effect the ill design which he imputed to Vergennes. Jay's commission gave him no office but to make peace, but he said, "The commission calls us colonies." He would have no halfway mode of acknowledging American independence. He would not treat at all until the independence of the United States had been irrevocably acknowledged.
Franklin, who saw with dismay that the sands of Shelburne's official life were fast running out, and that with his removal the only chance of the favorable peace now so nearly concluded would be lost. Oswald, in a letter to Shelburne, bore this just and noble witness to Franklin. Considering how long he has lived here and how he has been caressed, it must require a great share of resolution not to feel the effects of it, even in matters of business. Yet upon the whole, I must still say I have neither seen nor heard of anything that can make me doubt of his sincerity, nor of his attachment to his friends, meaning by those friends Lord Shelburne and his ministry. Unable to prevent the mischief of delay, Franklin was vigilant in observing and prompt in counteracting evil influences as promptly as they arose. On the 12th of August, 1782, he wrote to Secretary Livingston, "My conjecture of the design of Spain to coop us up within the Alleghany Mountains is now manifested. I hope Congress will insist on the Mississippi as the boundary and the free navigation of the river." But he could not dissuade his colleague from arresting the negotiation for peace and exposing its ultimate success to the greatest and most imminent hazard. The delay prolonged the sorrows of America. British partisans, under leaders selected from the most brutal of mankind, were scouring the interior of the southern country, robbing, destroying, and taking life at their pleasure. The spirit of humanity governed the conduct of the British as soon as Shelburne became minister. Those who had been imprisoned in England for treason were from that time treated as prisoners of war. Some of the ministers took part in relieving their distresses, and in the course of the summer, 600 of them or more were sent to America for exchange.
Sir Guy Carleton, who on the 5th of May 1782 superseded Sir Henry Clinton as Commander-in-Chief, desired an end to hostilities of every kind, treated all captives with gentleness, and set some of them free. When Washington asked that the Carolinians who had been exiled in violation of the capitulation of Charleston might have leave to return to their native state under a flag of truce, Carleton answered that they should be sent back at the cost of the King of England, and that everything should be done to make them forget the hardships which they had endured. In Georgia, Wayne drove the British from post after post and redoubt after redoubt until they were completely shut up in Savannah. In the rest of the state, its own civil government was restored. On the 11th of July, Savannah was evacuated, the Loyalists retreating into Florida, the regulars to Charleston, and Wayne, with his small but trustworthy corps, joined Greene in South Carolina. The summer of 1782 went by with no military events beyond skirmishes. The last who fell in the war was Wilmot, a worthy officer of the Maryland line, killed in an enterprise against James Island near the end of the year. A vehement impulse toward the consolidation of the Federal Union was given by Robert Morris, the finance minister of the Confederation, but he connected the reform of the Confederation with boldly speculative financial theories. A native of England, he never gained the sympathy or approbation of the American people. In May 1781, by highly colored promises of a better administration of the national finances and by appeals to patriotism, he succeeded in overcoming the scruples of Congress and obtained from it a charter for a national bank, of which the notes, payable on demand, should be receivable as specie for duties and taxes. On the 7th of January 1782, the bank commenced its very lucrative business. His first measure having been carried, he threw his rough energy into the design of initiating a strong central government. He engaged the services of Thomas Paine to recommend to the people a new confederation with competent powers. To the President of Congress he wrote, "I disclaim a delicacy which influences some minds to treat the states with tenderness and even adulation, while they are in the habitual inattention to the calls of national interest and honor. Nor will I be deterred from waking those who slumber on the brink of ruin." The expenditures of the United States for the war had been at the rate of $20 millions in specie annually. The estimates for the year 1782 were for $8 millions. Yet in the first 5 months of the year, the sums received amounted to less than $20,000. A vehement circular of Morris to the states was suppressed by the advice of Madison, and congressional committees were sent to importune the states. An aged officer of the army, Nicola by name, not an American by birth, clung obstinately to the opinion that republics are unstable and that a mixed government, of which the head might bear the title of king, would be best able to extricate the United States from their embarrassments. In a private letter to Washington, written without concert with anyone, he set forth his views in favor of monarchy, with an intimation that he who had so gloriously conducted the war should conduct the country in the smoother paths of peace. To this communication, Washington, on the 22nd of May, replied, "No occurrence in the course of the war has given me more painful sensations than your information of there being such ideas existing in the army as you have expressed, and I must view with abhorrence and reprehend with severity. If I am not deceived in the knowledge of myself, you could not have found a person to whom your schemes are more disagreeable. Let me conjure you then, if you have any regard for your country, concern for yourself or posterity, or respect for me, to banish these thoughts from your mind, and never communicate as from yourself or anyone else a sentiment of the like nature."
The Confederation acted only on the states and not on persons, yet Morris obtained from Congress authority to appoint receivers of the revenues of the United States. From the siege of Yorktown, Hamilton had repaired to Albany for the study of the law. Him Morris appointed collector of the revenue for the district of the state of New York. The office, which he accepted with hesitation, was almost a sinecure, but he was instructed by Morris to exert his talents with the New York legislature to forward the views of Congress. On the next meeting of the New York legislature, he repaired to Poughkeepsie and explained his views on the only system by which the United States could obtain a constitution. On the 19th of July, Schuyler, his father-in-law, invited the Senate to take into consideration the state of the nation. The committee reported that the radical source of most of the public embarrassments was the want of sufficient power in Congress, that the powers of government ought without loss of time to be extended, that the general government ought to have power to provide revenue for itself. And it was declared that the foregoing important ends can never be attained by deliberations of the states separately, but that it is essential to the common welfare that there should be as soon as possible a conference of the whole on the subject, and that it would be advisable to propose to Congress to recommend, and to each state to adopt, the measure of assembling a general convention of the states specially authorized to revise and amend the Confederation. These resolutions were accepted unanimously by each branch of the legislature, and Hamilton was elected a delegate to the Congress of the United States. Robert Morris saw the transcendent importance of the proceedings of the New York legislature and welcomed the young statesman to his new career, saying, "A firm, wise, manly system of federal government is what I once wished, what I now hope, what I dare not expect, but what I will not despair of." Under these auspices, Hamilton of New York became the colleague in Congress of Madison of Virginia. The condition of the Treasury of the United States was deplorable. Of the quotas for which requisitions had been made on the states, only $422,000 were collected. Delaware and the 3 southernmost states paid nothing. Only by the payment of usurious rates was the army rescued from being starved or disbanded. "Their patriotism and distress," wrote Washington in October, "have scarcely ever been paralleled, never been surpassed. Their long sufferance is almost exhausted. It is high time for a peace." If you found this deep dive into the critical moments of American peace negotiations fascinating, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from the American Revolution.